Most people think the best motorcycles of the 1980s are already famous. They're wrong, because some of the most innovative, best engineered, and flat out coolest bikes of that decade didn't become icons. They got ignored. These were motorcycles that arrived too early, cost too much, or scared the hell out of riders who weren't ready for them. Today, we're counting down 10 forgotten motorcycles from the 1980s that were actually legendary. Machines that deserve far more respect than history gave them. Stick around, because if you rode back then, or wished you did, at least one of these bikes is going to surprise you. Number 1. Honda CX500 Turbo. And I'm starting with this one because it's the bike that kicked off an entire war between the Japanese manufacturers. This was the world's first production turbocharged motorcycle, not the first turbo bike ever. Guys had been bolting turbos to bikes in their garages for years, but Honda actually went and built one, put it in showrooms, and sold it to regular people. Now, here's what made this thing special. Honda didn't just strap a turbo to an existing engine and call it a day. They spent years developing this machine. We're talking 230 patents, computer-controlled fuel injection, which was absolutely unheard of in 1982. The bike had more sensors than most cars at the time. Boost pressure, airflow, air temperature, engine temperature, RPM, throttle position. This thing had a brain. The engine was a 497cc V-twin with an IHI turbocharger mounted right up front. It made 82 horsepower, which doesn't sound like much today, but back then, that was serious power from a 500. The bike could run a quarter mile in 12.3 seconds and top out around 125 miles per hour. But here's the problem, and this is why you don't see them anymore. Honda only built it for 1 year, just 1982. They made about 5,400 of them total, and today, maybe 2,000 are still around. Honda learned a lot from this bike, fixed the issues, and moved on to the CX650 Turbo the next year. The other problem? This bike cost nearly $5 grand in 1982. That's like 15 or 16,000 in today's money for a 500cc Honda. An insurance company saw a turbo and went nuts with the premiums. But here's what matters. This bike started everything. Kawasaki, Suzuki, Yamaha. They all scrambled to build their own turbo bikes after Honda dropped this. The whole turbo craze of the early 80s started right here. If you can find one today in good shape, you're looking at serious money. We're talking collector territory. Number 2, Suzuki RG500 Gamma. And if you've never heard of this bike, buckle up, because this is one of the most insane motorcycles ever sold to the public. Suzuki took their factory racing technology and built a motorcycle you could buy, register, and ride on the street. The engine was a 498cc two-stroke square 4. That means 4 cylinders, 2 crankshafts, spinning in opposite directions to cancel out vibration. The thing made about 95 horsepower claimed, probably closer to 80 or 85 at the rear wheel. But here's what mattered. It weighed 386 pounds wet. Do that math. That's a power to weight ratio that would embarrass bikes costing 3 times as much. This bike was based directly on the XR45 factory racer. Same basic engine design that won championships with Barry Sheen in the late 70s and kept winning into the early 80s. Suzuki won 7 consecutive 500cc constructors titles during this period. They knew how to build race bikes, and they basically sold you one with turn signals. The engine had rotary disc valve induction, 428mm Mikuni flat slide carburetors, and a system called SEIC, Suzuki Automatic Exhaust Control, that changed the exhaust characteristics depending on RPM, 6-speed gearbox, full floater rear suspension, an aluminum box section frame that was basically a work of art. Power delivery? Forget about it below 8,000 RPM, but from 8 grand to 10.5, that's where this thing lived. It wasn't a bike you commuted on. This was a track weapon that happened to have a license plate. Now here's why you never saw them. Suzuki never officially sold these in the United States. Emissions regulations killed that idea immediately. You could get them in Canada, Europe, some other markets, but not here. They built about 9,300 of them total between 1985 and 1987. Sales dropped every year because honestly, who wants to deal deal with a peaky two-stroke that gets maybe 20 miles per gallon if you're lucky. But today, clean examples are worth 25 grand or more, because nothing else sounds like a square four two-stroke at 10,000 RPM. Nothing. Number 3, Yamaha FJ1200. Number 3 is the bike that created an entire category that's still going strong today, the Yamaha FJ1200. Yamaha introduced this in 1986, and it was their answer to a question nobody had really asked yet. What if you took a superbike, made it comfortable enough for long rides, gave it a fairing that actually worked, and tuned everything for real-world riding instead of just magazine tests? The FJ1200 had an 1188cc air-cooled inline 4, making 130 horsepower and 80 pound-feet of torque. That torque figure was the secret weapon. This thing pulled like a freight train from anywhere in the rev range. But the genius was in the details. Yamaha put the alternator behind the cylinders instead of on the end of the crankshaft. That made the engine narrower, which let them design a better frame. They used a perimeter frame with steel box sections that wrapped around the engine. First bike to really nail that design concept. The bike was fast, 150 miles per hour fast, but it was also comfortable. You could ride this thing all day, load it up with gear, take it on a trip, and when the road got twisty, it could hang with the sport bikes. Yamaha kept building these things for over a decade. In 1991, they added ABS as an option. First Japanese bike with anti-lock brakes. They built over 300,000 of them, so why don't people remember them? Because they worked so well that everyone took the idea and ran with it. Sport touring became its own category. The FJ just got absorbed into the crowd, but if you rode one back in the day, you remember. Phenomenal torque, reliable as gravity, air-cooled, which meant simple maintenance. These bikes just ran forever. You can still find them for reasonable money, and they're still good motorcycles nearly 40 years later. That tells you something right there. Number 4, BMW R80 GS. Number 4 is the bike that saved BMW and created the adventure motorcycle segment, the BMW R80 GS. BMW introduced this in 1980, and honestly, nobody knew what to make of it at first. It had a 797cc air-cooled boxer twin, BMW's traditional engine, but everything else was different. Long travel suspension, high ground clearance, knobbly tires, an upright riding position. This wasn't a touring bike, wasn't a sport bike, wasn't really a dirt bike either. It was something new, and BMW needed it to work because their motorcycle division was in trouble. This was basically a make or break bike for them. So what did BMW do? They went racing, and not just any racing, they entered the Paris-Dakar rally, which is basically the most brutal off-road race on the planet. Thousands of miles across deserts and mountains in Africa. 1981, they won it. 1983, won it again. 1984 took first and second place. Suddenly, everyone wanted one of these things because if a bike could survive Paris-Dakar, it could handle your camping trip through Colorado. BMW built about 21,800 of them between 1980 and 1987, which sounds like a lot, but spread that over 7 years and multiple markets. These aren't exactly common. The funny thing is, BMW's GS series became so successful that people forgot about the original. BMW celebrated building their 500,000th GS bike back in 2009. The name became bigger than the bike that started it all. Today, a clean R80 GS can cost you over 12 grand, and pristine examples are pushing 40,000 because this is where it all started. Every adventure bike you see today, from the big BMWs to the Harleys to the Japanese bikes, they all trace their DNA back to this motorcycle. It's the most important bike on this list, and most people under 50 have never even heard of it. Number 5, Kawasaki GPZ900R Ninja. And yeah, this is the bike from Top Gun, but before Tom Cruise made it famous in 1986, this bike was already a big deal because in 1984, when Kawasaki introduced it, this was the first production motorcycle to break 150 miles per hour. Let that sink in for a second. First production bike to hit 150. That was a huge milestone. The GPZ900R had a 908cc 4cc liquid-cooled inline-4 with 16 valves. First production bike with a liquid-cooled 16-valve 4. Kawasaki had been working on this in secret for 6 years, and when they finally showed it, everyone else was playing catch-up. The engine made 117 horsepower, which was serious power in 1984, but the real trick was how they packaged it. Kawasaki mounted the engine low in the frame and used it as a stressed member, part of the structure. That eliminated the subframe and saved weight. 6-speed transmission, uni-track rear suspension with an air shock, adjustable front forks. The whole package worked. And then the movie came out. Suddenly every guy in America wanted the bike that Tom Cruise rode in Top Gun. Kawasaki couldn't build them fast enough. They sold over 70,000 of these in the first 13 years. And here's the crazy part. They kept building them in Japan until 2003, 19 years of production. So why is this bike on a forgotten list? Because Kawasaki built so many different Ninjas after this one that the original got lost in the shuffle. The ZX6R, the ZX10R, the ZX14R. Every few years, there's a new Ninja that's faster and better, but this is where the Ninja name came from. This is the bike that started a dynasty that's still going today. Number 6. Suzuki Katana 1100. Alright, number 6. And this one's a bit different because we're talking about design as much as performance. The Suzuki Katana 1100. Suzuki did something unusual in the early 80s. They hired an outside design firm to style their new flagship sport bike, a German company called Target Design, and what they came up with was polarizing, sharp angles everywhere, integrated fuel tank and seat, a headlight treatment that looked like nothing else on the road. Some people thought it was beautiful. Other people thought it looked like it had been drawn with a ruler and no curves allowed, but nobody ignored it. Under that styling was a 1075cc transverse inline-4 making 111 horsepower. Suzuki claimed it was the fastest mass production motorcycle in the world when it launched in 1982, and it probably was. The interesting thing about the Katana was the ergonomics. For such an aggressive-looking bike, it was actually comfortable to ride. The seating position, the handlebar placement, everything worked. The designers had done their homework. Suzuki built these from 1982 through 1993 with various engine sizes. The 1100 was the king of the range, so why don't people remember them? Because that styling divided people. You either loved it or you hated it. There wasn't much middle ground, and by the late 80s, the GSX-R series was dominating, and the Katana kind of faded into the background. But here's the thing, Suzuki just brought the Katana name back a few years ago with a modern version because they realized that bike had a following, and original 1100s, the values are climbing because people are starting to appreciate how different they were. That design still looks modern today, sharp, angular, no unnecessary curves. In some ways, it was ahead of its time. It just took the world a while to catch up. Number 7, Honda VF750 Sabre. Number 7 is going to be quick, because this bike's story is more about what it represented than how successful it was. The Honda VF750 Sabre from 1982. This was Honda's first production motorcycle with a liquid-cooled V4 engine. Not the first V4 ever. Manufacturers had played with the configuration before, but Honda went all in. Liquid cooling, double overhead cams, shaft drive, Pro-Link rear suspension. The Sabre shared this engine with the VF750 Magna, which was more of a cruiser. The Sabre was the sport version. Honda was betting big on the V4 layout. They thought it would be the next big thing. Smooth power delivery, compact packaging, good balance. But here's the problem. The early VF engines had reliability issues. Cam problems, specifically. The cams would wear prematurely, and it damaged Honda's reputation. They eventually fixed it, but the damage was done. The V4 never really caught on the way Honda hoped. Most manufacturers stuck with inline 4s for sport bikes. The configuration worked better for cruisers and touring bikes, but not so much for performance applications, so the VF750 Sabre became a footnote. An interesting experiment that didn't quite work out. It's historically significant as Honda's first production V4, but beyond that, most people have forgotten it existed. You can find them for cheap today, and if you get one with the later, fixed engine, they're perfectly decent motorcycles. They just never lived up to the hype. Number 8. Yamaha VMAX 1200. Number 8 is a bike that's that's only forgotten if you're under 40, because if you were around in the 80s and 90s, you knew about the Yamaha VMAX. This thing was a monster. Yamaha introduced it in 1985, and it was like nothing else. An 1197cc liquid-cooled V4 making 145 horsepower and 83 pound-feet of torque in a cruiser format. This wasn't a bike you bought to tour the country in comfort. This was a bike you bought to destroy people at stoplights and run 10-second quarter miles. The VMAX could do the quarter in right around 10 seconds flat. That's supercar territory, and it would do it all day long because under that aggressive styling was a rock-solid Yamaha engine that just worked. The riding position was laid back. The seat was comfortable. You could cruise on this thing, but twist the throttle hard, and it was violent. Absolutely violent. The power delivery would light up the rear tire if you weren't careful. Yamaha built the first generation VMAX from 1985 all the way through 2007. 22 years. They barely changed it because they didn't need to. It sold, it worked, and it had a cult following. This bike created the power cruiser segment. Before the VMAX, cruisers were about looking cool and making noise. After the VMAX, they had to perform, so why is it on this list? Because Yamaha completely redesigned it in 2009, and that bike got all the attention. The original VMAX kind of faded into the background, remembered fondly by people who rode them but unknown to younger riders. Clean first generation VMAXs are breaking 10 grand now, because people are realizing what they had. This was Harley Davidson's worst nightmare, a Japanese muscle cruiser that combined reliability with genuine performance. Nothing sounded like it, nothing felt like it, and honestly, nothing else scared you quite the same way when you pinned the throttle in second gear. Number 9. Honda RC30. Number 9 is the most expensive bike on this list, and it's only forgotten because most people couldn't afford one when it was new, and definitely can't afford one now. This was a homologation special. Honda built it specifically so they could go racing in World Superbike. They needed to build 5,000 for the US market to qualify, and that's exactly what they did. The engine was a 748cc V4 with gear-driven cams. If you've never heard of a bike with gear-driven cams, it's a distinctive whine that you never forget. The whole bike was designed for racing. Single-sided swing arm, full fairings, lightweight everything, and it dominated. Honda's factory team won multiple World Superbike championships with this bike. It proved that Honda could build a world-class sport bike when they wanted to. When it was new in 1988, it cost about 8,500 pounds in the UK. A pristine example will cost you over 65,000 pounds. That's roughly 87,000 US dollars. For a 1980s motorcycle, these aren't bikes people ride anymore. They're investments. They sit in climate-controlled garages and get trailered to shows. Because if you crash an RC30 today, you just destroyed a year's salary. Most people have forgotten about them because most people never saw one in person. They were rare when new, and they're rarer now. But if you were into racing in the late 80s and early 90s, you remember, this was the bike to beat, and Honda only built it because the rules said they had to. Number 10, Bimota Tessie 1D, and number 10 is the wildest bike on this entire list, the Bimota Tessie 1D. Now, Bimota was never a mainstream manufacturer. This was a small Italian company that built exotic bikes in tiny numbers, but the Tessie was something else entirely. The prototype showed up in 1983, but they didn't actually build production bikes until 1991, and what made it special was the front end. It didn't have forks at all. Instead, it used hub center steering. The front wheel was mounted on a hub in the center, and the steering worked through a series of linkages. The whole point was to eliminate fork dive under braking and separate steering from suspension. The engine was a Ducati 904cc V-twin, making 120 horsepower, but nobody cared about the engine. Everyone was staring at that front end, trying to figure out how it worked. Bimota only built about 20 to 25 production units. That's it. And they were expensive. We're talking changing the belts cost over $2,000. So why is this on a forgotten list? Because most people never even knew it existed. It was too exotic, too expensive, too strange. But it spawned a lineage. Bimota kept developing the Tessie concept, and they're still building them today. The original Tessie 1D proved that you could do things differently. You didn't have to use telescopic forks just because everyone else did. And while hub center steering never caught on mainstream, it showed that the 1980s 1980s were about pushing boundaries and trying new things. If you can find one today, you're looking at serious collector money, but good luck finding one. So these were 10 motorcycles from the 1980s that pushed boundaries, created new categories, and changed motorcycling. And the 1980s were this incredible period where manufacturers were willing to take risks. They built turbocharged bikes that barely worked. They sold street-legal race bikes that scared their own engineers. They created entire segments that we take for granted today, and most people today have no idea any of this happened. If you enjoyed this list, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more content like this, and drop a comment. Which of these bikes would you want in your garage? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.